Incredulous. Chapter 3. We find ourselves in uncharted waters. Here, there be dragons. 24 hours earlier, and approximately 63 miles east of Jacksonville Beach, Florida, a massive electrical disturbance had crippled the treasure-hunting submersible Defiant's navigation capabilities. The seas above the submersible were flashing with brilliant colors as balls of lightning struck the water. Trying to maintain its position, Defiant hovered 30 meters below the surface. In appearance, the ship resembled a cross between a great white shark and a manta ray. No viewing ports were visible on the hull's sleek exterior. Its wide body provided spacious work areas and living quarters. The main vertical stabilizers, positioned to the rear, resembled the space shuttle's swept-back wings. Two dorsal vanes extended outward at a 45-degree angle, much like the F-18 Hornet fighter jet's twin tails. These acted as rudders and controlled pitch. The ship's smooth, shark-like nose cone gave it a predator's appearance. Defiant's hull was smooth and rubbery, like the skin of an orca, for noise suppression and radar dampening. Her hull was treated with an anoic coating that absorbed microwave radiation, effectively making the ship invisible to radar while on the surface. The bottom of the nose cone was flat and necked out towards two massive propulsor shrouds, which flanked a transparent, bullet-shaped command center. The shroud's ejection ports were equipped with tail feathers, movable fins that flexed and rotated in order to direct the flow of the propulsion thrust, thus helped to stabilize the ship over a work area. The ship's engines were massive, the silent propulsion system taking up most of the space below decks. All ships of the treasure fleet sported dazzled camouflage. The design resembled fragments of various multicolored material glued together helter-skelter like a collage. Dazzle camouflage had been developed by the Allies towards the end of World War II. Not a single ship painted with dazzle camouflage design was ever torpedoed by an enemy submarine. The pattern helped to break up the submersible's outline when viewed from the air. This was crucial because most of the Spanish fleet's sunken treasure galleons lay in the clear, shallow waters of the Caribbean. At the moment, the Defiant was trapped in an unexpected electromagnetic storm within the Bermuda Triangle. Although submerged, the ship's instrumentation was being affected. All compasses were either spinning slowly or completely erratic. All communications had been out for some time. Due to its crucial mission, the ship had to maintain position over an area known to disrupt the Earth's natural magnetic field. The ship was able to maintain neutral buoyancy using pressure sensor feedback loops. This system did not rely on computers to maintain the ship's depth. Aboard the craft, technicians gathered around a horizontal cylinder-shaped deprivation chamber. The compartment was spacious, with full overhead room fore and aft. The port and starboard bulkheads tapered to a 45-degree angle just behind the chamber. Sealed within the electromagnetic shielded chamber lay their commander, Tarek, who was conducting a remote viewing exercise. Tarek had once been an exorcist for the Roman Catholic Church. He'd left the order, having become disillusioned with church dogma and the bureaucracy of an incredibly inefficient system. It did not help matters that any records of Tarek's ancestry had been obliterated by Spanish conquistadors and Catholic priests. A rogue priest turned treasure hunter, Tarek had learned to combine his special ability to bilocate with a technique known as remote viewing. The procedures for remote viewing were pioneered and developed by black ops contractors for the CIA. The recently declassified military intelligence project was known as Stargate. The understanding that our unique awareness is not restricted to our biological life forms is central to remote viewing, which offered the ability to locate targets across time and space. Through the use of remote viewing, Tarek's treasure hunting teams had managed to locate and recover nearly half of the Spanish galleon treasures lost in the Pacific Ocean, and about 25% of the treasure galleons lost in the Caribbean. Locating targets in the past was normally not an easy task, but the intense human emotions and excitement generated during the sinking of a ship proved an easy target for the remote viewers. The technique seemed ideal for locating sunken treasure ships. Few individuals are aware that every year for 250 years, between 1565 and 1815, Spain had sent one galleon to Manila in the Philippines. The Manila galleons, as they became known, required an entire year to complete the round-trip journey across the Pacific. In the Philippines, the ships were laden with gold, Chinese porcelain, gems, and jewelry. The galleon would then make a 6-month return trip to Acapulco, Mexico. From there, the cargo was transported overland by burro to the Gulf of Mexico. During that quarter millennia, Spain lost a total of 130 Manila galleons, each ship sinking with nearly a billion in treasure. A few ended up off the coast of California. One was lost as far north as Oregon. The Spanish kept detailed records of manifest and shipwreck locations for each of the lost Manila galleons. Before the implementation of remote viewing, treasure hunting teams had relied heavily on the efforts of specialized research teams. These researchers scoured archives and libraries around the world, locating and translating such records. Unfortunately, the records of the lost Manila galleons had been destroyed during the Mexican Revolution in both Acapulco and Mexico City. The records on the other side of the Pacific met with a similar fate when the U.S. forces bombed the Philippines' National Archives during World War II. During this particular remote viewing session, Tarek was targeting a Spanish galleon, Nuestra Señora de las Maravillas. The ship had been lost in the Atlantic off the Little Bahama Banks during a hurricane on 4 July 1656. Military-trained operational remote viewers, at least in the Stargate project, had been directed to specific targets on their information-gathering mission by guides. The individuals guiding the remote viewers through these exercises were unaware of the target's identity. A target could be a person, place, or thing. Targets were not restricted to the present moment or this planet for that matter. To prevent what had been termed loading a target, a simple code number was used to designate each target. In other words, each mission was conducted as a sort of double blind test. The target's identity was not known to the guide and could not have been known by the remote viewer. Although the military denounced the Stargate project as a failure, 95% of all data retrieved by their remote viewers remains classified to this day. A normal CIA information gathering operation is usually only 15% effective, not 95% effective. Tarek's technique did not require a guide. He already had a rough understanding of where his targets were located and the approximate time and date they'd sunk or been destroyed by a hurricane. Loading the target, also known as letting one's imagination run wild, was always a danger. For this reason, Tarek employed a vast network of researchers. Once the researchers were given the information retrieved by Tarek and knew what to look for, they set out to either verify or discredit the information received. To date, Modern treasure hunters and archaeologists had only managed to locate about 100 of the more than 1,400 treasure ships scattered throughout an area known as the Spanish Main. The treasures recovered by Tarek's teams had originally been pillaged from his ancient ancestors by the Spanish conquistadors. Having recovered billions in sunken treasure throughout the Pacific, Tarek's teams had established a vast network of secret bases from which to conduct their operations, through the use of highly sophisticated submersibles like Defiant. These modern-day pirates had managed to avoid the attention of the evolving global fascist dictatorship calling itself the New World Order. The transparent, bullet-shaped compartment that extended into the sea offered an exceptional panoramic view of the work area below the ship during recovery operations. From the command center, all of the robotic arms, lights, vacuum guns, and blowers could easily be operated. The transparent walls were 6 inches thick and made from dense, clear, vacuum-formed plastic. Aurora sat in the command chair, observing the colored balls of lightning as they struck the ocean's surface in the distance. Aurora's Asian appearance made her stand out from the other crew members, that and her being only 12 years old. She was one of the lost girls of China. Chinese government restrictions permitted families to have only one child. Because of the ancient preference for boys to carry on the family name, an estimated 100,000 Chinese girls have been aborted, killed, or abandoned when only days old. Aurora never knew her father or mother. Abandoned shortly after birth, she had been discovered by an expedition team sent into China to explore an ancient pyramid structure. Aurora had been named after the Roman goddess of the dawn, the time of day she was found. Her long black hair contrasted sharply with the beautifully embroidered white silk kimono she wore. She abhorred wearing anything that resembled a uniform, preferring to dress in traditional Chinese silk garments. Aurora was a star child, and like the indigo children before her, she was highly telepathic. Normally, her telepathic abilities permitted her to communicate with other star children aboard nearby vessels. These children's telepathic abilities had enabled the treasure fleet to remain secretive for as long as it had. Aurora wondered if normal people felt the way she felt now, alone and enclosed by the walls that surrounded her. She could sense the presence of a few of her friends on board the ship, but beyond that there was only emptiness. Aurora observed that the brilliant fireballs penetrating the surface of the sea continued burning for some distance. In the forward observation area below the ship's hull, the open sea should have been brighter, dimness most likely due to the storm. Earlier, Raven, the ship's captain, had activated the searchlights, but could not detect the ocean floor. She had ordered that the lights remain on, that the ship would not be in danger of running aground. Aurora was fascinated by the sharks that were drawn to the work lights. "Hey kiddo, anything new?" asked Raven in her throaty English accent, her thick ebony black hair falling off her shoulders as she leaned forward to ask the question. It was Raven who had discovered and adopted Aurora. Raven's name was derived from her beautiful, perfectly straight hair. Her face was not overly pretty, but she was striking in her captain's uniform. She was a strict vegetarian, and her athletic build concealed the fact that she would be a senior citizen in a few years. "No, sir, I can't sense the presence of anyone beyond this ship," said Aurora, removing her special observation helmet. "Aurora, the crew is considering awakening the commander so we can try and get out of the storm." "No, you cannot. I can't sense him either. I think Tarek is somehow linked with the storm, trapped in it maybe. I get glimpses of him, and then he's gone. We have to hold our position, Captain." Aurora assured her, and we cannot remove him from the chamber. The equipment is malfunctioning. We are not getting any reliable vital signs on him. He could be in danger, Aurora. Monique entered the forward compartment center and informed the captain that the ship was still not responding to the helm's commands. Even if we did wake him, we would not be able to escape the storm. There are mechanical levers he can activate to alert us if he needs assistance, and so far he has not used them. I recommend we follow Aurora's request to leave him in the deprivation chamber until his mission is complete, Captain. Monique's French accent somehow took the edge off her words. I have never encountered a situation like this in all my years of guarding the commander. If Tarek is choosing to remain in the deprivation chamber, we must trust that it is for a good reason. Monique's eyes, usually topped with a frown, were an intense Kelly green, so bright that it appeared she was wearing contact lenses to change the color of her irises. Ironically, she was colorblind and could not see the shade of her eyes. A shame, for they were rather striking. Although Monique radiated a personal confidence, an indefinable sadness added to the officer's seriousness. Locks of her thick burgundy hair fell, unstyled, past her shoulders. She was hauntingly beautiful, shapely, almost to the point of distraction. Knowing this about herself, she usually dressed in battle gear in order to draw less attention. "What Spanish galleon was he trying to locate, Raven?" asked Aurora, attempting to steer the conversation in a new direction. "The Nuestra Señora de las Maravillas. It's Spanish for Our Lady of the Miracles." The ship was also referred to as the Almiranta because the admiral of the fleet commanded her. "Who was the lady?" "Mother Mary, I suppose." "What miracles did she perform?" asked Aurora. "I'm not sure, but she must have performed some for them to call her that," Raven assured her. "As I understand it, the combined armada was made up of 22 Spanish ships, mostly merchant vessels, on their voyage back to Spain. In the Archivo General de Indias, the General Archive of the Indies, in Seville, Spain, one of our researchers located the diary of Padre Diego Rivanderia, who survived the wreck along with 44 others. According to him, the lead ship Capitana and the rear ship Almiranta carried the main treasures. They were the fleet's two most heavily armed war galleons. Along with its share of treasure, the Almiranta carried a 1,600-pound solid gold life-size statue of the Madonna and Child, Mother Mary, and the infant Jesus. There was also a 3,000-pound gold table encrusted with emeralds. These are what Tarek was targeting. On 4 July 1656, the Jesus Maria, one of the merchant ships, struck a coral reef that tore off her rudder, continued Raven. Her captain anchored the disabled vessel and fired her cannon as a warning to the rest of the fleet to avoid the shoals. But the crew of the Maravillas panicked, thinking that they were under attack. They changed course and collided with the Capitana. The two warships remained lodged together for some time. When they finally disengaged, the Capitana appeared to be unharmed and continued sailing, but the Maravilla's bow had been damaged below the waterline. She began to take on water. The admiral ordered the anchors to be jettisoned in an effort to lighten the load, but the ship was carrying over 250 tons of silver bars and more than 600 passengers. In an effort to save lives and treasure, the admiral ordered that the ship be run aground on the shoals that the merchant ship, the Jesus Maria, had struck, explained Raven. She struck bottom half a dozen times. When she finally hit the reef, it is believed her hull had been damaged. She simply slipped over the reef and came to rest on a sandbank in 50 feet of water. Both her stern and forecastles were out of the water. Do you remember those drawings of the old Spanish galleons? Raven asked Aurora. The castles are the part that stick up out of the ship in the front and the back. Everyone was safe and everything seemed fine, but soon strong northerly winds began to blow and giant seas began to build, continued Raven. Huge waves generated by the hurricane broke the galleon into three pieces. The bow, with the silver, remained in place, while the fore and aft castles were carried away by the wind and waves of the storm. It is this top portion of the wreck that contained the Madonna and Child and possibly the gold table as well. All those who were on the castles were never seen again. Why would anyone want to have a 3,000-pound table? Asked Aurora in disbelief. Well, back then if you brought back gold in the form of money or bars, it was taxed by the king and the church. If you had coins, they would be divided. If you brought back a gold bar, they would chisel off a piece from one end and stamp it with a seal to indicate you had paid the tax. But if the gold or silver was in the form of dinnerware, jewelry, or furniture, it was not considered money. The table would not be very useful if the king and the church each had removed a leg to recover their 10%, would it? Captain, the hatch is opening. He's out, called the technician from the open hatch. The three headed up toward the deprivation tank. Emerging from the deprivation tank, Tarek did not bother to disconnect the array of electrical sensors still attached to his muscular 6-foot frame. Grabbing a towel, he headed for the captain's quarters, with two technicians trailing after him. Seeing Tarek enter her quarters, Raven followed, wondering what could be wrong. Upon entering the compartment, she noticed Tarek attempting to activate the computer. She informed him that the electronic systems were operating erratically and that all communications were out. Tarek considered her statement but gave no reply. He stood and approached the bulkhead to his left. Opening a compartment, he drew out a Bible, one of many versions from Raven's personal library. Noticing he was still soaking wet, he dried his hands, not wishing to damage the book. He wrapped a towel on his head in order to absorb the water from his long black hair. Without a word, he opened the book and began skimming over the Gospels, beginning with Matthew. "Commander, you were in the chamber for a long time, sir." "Are you all right?" asked Raven, concern clouding her face. "Is anything wrong, monsieur?" inquired Monique. "Oui, something is very wrong, Monique." Turning to the ship's captain, he stated, "Raven, you and I have read over and discussed these Gospels countless times. Tell me, what day of the week was Jesus crucified on?" asked Tarek, not bothering to look up. "In other words, on what specific day of the week did the crucifixion take place?" "Friday." "Yes, it had been on Friday." "Exactly," interrupted Tarek. "That's the story that we've been handed down by the church for ages." "That's why we celebrate Good Friday, isn't it?" she asked. "Friday, that's what we've been taught since Sunday school," acknowledged Tarek. With his index finger firmly marking his place in the Gospel of Luke, he added, "Come closer, I need you to see this." Pointing to Luke 23:56, he read, "After the crucifixion, the women rested on the day of the annual high Sabbath." This account is similar to the version given in Mark's Gospel. Unfamiliar with Jewish customs, I took it to mean Saturday, the Sabbath. But according to what just transpired, the annual high Sabbath hath nothing to do with Saturday, Tarek explained. During the time of Jesus, the Jews did not flock to Jerusalem merely to celebrate for one day. The festivities of Passover actually lasted for a total of 8 days, explained Tarek, pausing for effect. The day of Passover was followed by the week-long celebration of unleavened bread. The first day of this seven-day feast was recognized by the Jews as the annual high Sabbath. Tarek read aloud from the Gospel of Luke. After the high Sabbath, they, meaning the women, prepared their spices. This passage refers to a day immediately following the high Sabbath, on which women were permitted to perform work. Then they, the women, rested again on the Sabbath day according to the commandment. Luke acknowledges that the crucifixion occurred on the Passover. He then goes on to say that the following day was the annual high Sabbath, a day on which the women were required to rest. On the next day, the women were permitted to perform work. Luke then records that the women rested again on the following day in keeping with the fourth commandment. Do you understand the implications of what I've just read? He asked, excited. I'm perplexed, admitted Raven. Luke doesn't seem to be making any sense, Commander. Flipping back through the pages, Tarek explained that most Christians are not aware that Luke was not one of the 12 apostles chosen by Jesus. Luke was a Greek physician and a follower of Paul. Luke's Greek is far more refined than that of the Greek Gospels of Mark and Matthew. His style is more eloquent. Pointing to the first verse in the chapter, he added, Luke states that from the outset, he carefully and personally investigated everything. He affirms that he found it to be well supported by witnesses from the story's beginning. To state from the onset that your account was as accurate as possible was a common practice among Greek historians. Luke explains that the day on which the women made their preparations was enclosed by two very distinct and separate Sabbath days, added Turk. The first Sabbath day was the annual High Holy Sabbath, a day that occurs only once a year. This High Holy Sabbath coincides with Thursday. The following day, Friday, allowed the women to make their preparations. Saturday follows Friday and accounts for the additional Sabbath day that was observed according to the fourth commandment. Looking up at the two astonished women, Tarek posed the question, is it possible that Jesus was crucified on Wednesday and not on Friday, as we have been led to believe? And if they got something that simple so screwed up, what else did they get wrong? There must be some mistake, sir. Perhaps that translation is in error, suggested Raven, reaching for another version of the Bible from the compartment in her captain's quarters. After reading the verse, she stared in astonishment and asked, how on earth did you come by this information? Well, that is what I need my entire team of researchers to investigate, said Tarek. Writing feverishly, he began to compose a list of questions far more embarrassing and dangerous to the church than anything he'd ever thought to ask his superiors during his time as a priest. Raven, what I just experienced in the deprivation tank goes far beyond remote viewing or bilocating. I'm not sure what exactly happened in there, he said, handing the list to Raven. The researchers are to select whatever topic they feel most comfortable with. Recall all of them to Antares as soon as humanly possible. Antares was a floating city and one of several secret bases designed to conduct covert underwater treasure hunting operations. Being a Scorpio, Tarek had named the base after the brightest star in that constellation. Because of its color and position, Antares is known as the Red Heart of Scorpio. The city was saucer-shaped and measured 500 meters in diameter. At the moment, it was stationed in the Caribbean Sea north of Venezuela. Raven glanced down at the sheet and read aloud, investigate these possibilities regarding the story of Jesus Christ. Did the town of Nazareth exist before Jesus' birth? Was the betrayal of Jesus actually based upon prophecies from the Old Testament, and if so, which prophecies? Is it possible that Jesus' arrest was conducted by Romans for having committed an offense to Caesar's personage, sedition, crime punishable by death? And is it possible Jesus was guilty of the charges against him? Was Jesus crucified on Friday, Passover 33 CE, Good Friday, or was he crucified on a Wednesday Passover years earlier? Investigate the possibility that his body was wrapped in the Shroud of Turin. Investigate the legends of the savior gods born of virgin mothers, more specifically, any similarities between the legends and church dogma. Are there any written records in history that can verify an eclipse occurred on the day Jesus was crucified, and more importantly, that it lasted 3.5 hours? Investigate the legends concerning a double or identical twin brother of Jesus. Lastly, and most importantly, investigate the possibility that Judas remained a faithful disciple who never betrayed Jesus, never committed suicide, and was counted among those who saw him resurrected. Jesus, guilty of the charges leveled against him, blurted out Raven in dismay. Judas never killed himself? He was counted among those who saw Jesus resurrected? What on earth? Raven, you and I are both aware that the Gospels were heavily edited by the founding church leaders during the first few centuries. Having just read this verse in the Gospel of Luke, I am convinced that enough evidence still remains in the New Testament to prove. Prove that Jesus was guilty? Raven interrupted. Sir, Jesus was innocent. Pilate later recanted his actions and tried to pardon him. Remember? That's what I thought too, Raven, agreed Tarek. But one does not pardon an innocent man. An innocent man would have to have been acquitted of the charges. Commander, I doubt that you will need the entire team of researchers to track down proof of. Terry cut her off. I am willing to allocate the time and assets for this task. Assemble the entire team at our underwater base in Taris. The floating city's massive library should provide sufficient resources for the investigation. I need to know if the truth is still in the Gospels, because if what I just experienced is a more accurate account of events surrounding the crucifixion, it means that the Church has managed to edit and twist the truth beyond all recognition. Looking down at his hands and staring at his water-wrinkled fingers, he asked, "Just how long was I in there?" "We are uncertain, Commander," explained Tarek. "The ship's chronometers are malfunctioning. All communications are out. The compasses are gyrating wildly, making it impossible for us to verify that we are holding our position." "What about the gyroscopic non-magnetic compasses?" "The gyroscopic compasses are slowly spinning counterclockwise. The acoustic imaging systems are all erratic, but they seem to indicate the ship is not turning. We have no idea how long you were in the deprivation chamber. Probably no more than a few hours." "Why do you ask? Did it feel longer?" "It felt much longer." "How did I manage to remain waterlogged in the deprivation tank for so long?" Tarek inquired. "That was Aurora's doing," said Monique. "She was adamant that we not disturb you. Should we have awakened you, Commander?" "No. I am grateful that you did not. You did well to follow Aurora's recommendation." "She seemed to be the only one in contact with you," said Raven. "She has not been able to contact any of the Indigo or Star Children telepathically, though. It's as if we've lost contact with the rest of Earth's inhabitants. While I was in there, it felt as if time or reality shifted. Perhaps the entire ship shifted with me," reasoned Tarek. "Instead of simply observing, which is what normally happens when I bilocate during remote viewing, I became part of what was unfolding before me. I found myself in another body, in another time. I still had an awareness of who I was, but I also had control of another person's body and access to their memories, as if I had somehow lived that life and was reliving the events. While you waited hours in here, I experienced years in there. I was back in the time of Christ, before and after Jesus' crucifixion, and although I was in a position to try and avert its outcome, it still came to pass. Everything led up to it, but there were strange irregularities. For instance, Jesus' death is remembered as occurring on a Good Friday. The crucifixion I observed happened in the middle of the week and was accompanied by massive earthquakes as well as an eclipse, if you can call it that. The moon certainly appeared to move in front of the sun, but then it just hung there, suspended for hours. That sounds wild, agreed Raven. You don't understand, Tarek explained. While I was in there, I discovered that Passovers only take place during full moons, something I'd never heard of. Don't you see, Raven? If that's true, the moon was on the wrong side of the world. It should not have been able to cause a solar eclipse of any kind. Stranger still, that night there was another eclipse, a red lunar eclipse. A red lunar eclipse on the night of the crucifixion, interrupted Raven excitedly. Tarek nodded. Two eclipses on the same day, a few hours apart, and continued. What I experienced seemed incredibly real. That is why I need the help of my research teams. Astronomical computer programs should be able to confirm the lunar eclipse easily enough. But why leave something like that out of the Gospels, Raven? If what I experienced was an actual event, it would mean that the Church has deliberately preserved a false version of what transpired. At that moment, a crackly voice squawked over the intercom. Captain, we are still having some electronic difficulties, but we've managed to re-establish contact with the satellite. I've confirmed our position and time, and it's not when or where we should be. Captain, we lost communication for 3 hours, 8 minutes. Our present position is just south of the strait between the Cuban Peninsula and the Yucatan. Yucatan? That's over 800 miles from our last known position. Helm, can you confirm that? Asked Raven. The position is correct, Captain. According to incoming reports, several ships in the area had already gone to red alert when Defiant went missing. I spent I sent a brief situation report, but Atlantic Command is requesting we come in for a full diagnostic. What of Hypnotica, the ship's artificial intelligence computer? Is she still not responding? Asked Raven. The AI is still not responding, Captain, answered the helm. Raven, it sounds like communications are still a bit sketchy, said Tarek. Once the AI comes online, encrypt the message. Order all researchers and investigators to be taken off whatever designated assignments they are presently involved with. Tell them to report to Antares as soon as possible. Issue a red alert along with the message. I want to recall everyone with as little resistance on their part as possible. I know this order will make little or no sense to them. Emphasize that I need everything they can find on the Gnostic mystery religions, regarding the legends of the savior gods, more specifically any beliefs of that ancient religion that smack of church dogma. Well, what is this dogma of the church? Asked a puzzled Monique. Dogma means you do not question the authority of the church or anything they teach, said Aurora, who had just re-entered the captain's quarters with additional towels. It means you are to accept what you are told, without question. Raven started to leave the captain's quarters for the command center. She turned abruptly and stood at the entrance, straightening out her jacket. Sir, what do I give as the reason we chose to start your remote view at the specific location just minutes before the storm began in my sitrep? In your situation report, State that I chose the time and location based on the position of the galactic center, the sun's zenith, in relation to the ship's horizon. If they do not understand, have them contact espionage for details. As of this moment, all details of what has transpired during this operation are to remain classified. Do not transmit any information pertaining to this mission over the airways unless it's encrypted. Based on what I just observed, there is a very real possibility that we are in the end of days. Understood, Raven said, biting the corner of her lower lip. Sir, I do not know if you have ever noticed the titles of the books in my personal library. How could I not notice them? It was you who led me to some amazing authors. And I think I can now answer some of those questions we've pondered over. At least I hope I can. Was he actually married, sir? Jesus, I mean, said Raven hesitantly. Very much so, in accordance with the Hebrew customs of that time, explained Tarek. The Mishnah is an oral rabbinic tradition. It made it clear that any young man who was not married by the age of 20 was considered accursed of God. If Jesus had not been married, the scribes would have been quick to point it out. One thing that did surprise me was how incredibly young Mary Magdalene was. She was still a teenager, and Lazarus, her little brother, was only about 10 years old at the time. Then I take it you saw the disciple Thomas, she asked excitedly. When I return, will you tell me of him? Of all the disciples, he is my favorite. Exhaling briefly while staring into nothing, Tarek settled back into the spacious ebony captain's chair and pursed his lips, wondering where to begin. There was no disciple named Thomas. By that I mean the man did not exist. There was a disciple who was known by that nickname. Thomas is not a formal name. The Aramaic word means twin. It was a nickname applied to one of the disciples of Jesus' inner circle because he looked so much like the Master. I knew the name Thomas meant twin, but you're saying this was a nickname applied to one of the 12? Wait a minute. If Thomas's nickname, that would insinuate there were only 11 disciples. Oh, you caught that. Well, that didn't take you too long. Jesus did select 12 disciples. It would appear one has been erased from memory, but not from history, I would think. And that, mon capitaine, is why I am recalling all researchers to the Round Table of Antares. This brings me to my next topic. Raven, would you consider joining my group of investigators? I could really use someone with your knowledge and experience on the team. When we dock at Antares, you could transplant your extensive library ashore and assist with the investigation into the matters surrounding the crucifixion. If the Defiant remains docked at Antares, I could simply use my captain's quarters. You know how much I dislike being around large groups of people for too long. That's an excellent idea, Tarek agreed as he rose from the chair and took a second towel Aurora was offering him. But I think you will find the energy from this group exhilarating as opposed to draining, as large gatherings normally are. Raven, at this point you know more than the rest regarding Thomas. Would you do me the honor of spearheading the investigation into the true identity of Jesus look-alike? Commander, you know very well that I don't believe Jesus died on the cross, contested Raven. My research has led me to believe that Jesus may have been given a drug that induced death-like symptoms. I believe that his uncle, Joseph of Arimathea, with the help of the Essenes, nursed Jesus back to life, after which he traveled to Persia, where he had spent most of the missing 18 years. That is exactly why I need you on my team, Tarek assured her. You know that most of my beliefs are based on church dogma. And, by the way, those masters Jesus learned from in Persia achieved their light bodies after 13 years of intense meditation. How many of us could occupy our minds with thoughts of love, joy, and peace for that many weeks, let alone years? Jesus mastered this technique and accomplished his transformation in only 3 days. Raven, if what I just experienced actually took place, there is an event about to unfold, and some of us will be expected to make this transition in the twinkling of an eye. Why would any of this information pose a danger to Antares? Asked Raven. I would think that our ship having moved 1,300 kilometers from the Bahamas to our present location off the coast of Cuba would pose a greater threat. What do you mean, Captain? Asked Aurora. We never moved from our position. We are still floating over the underwater pyramid city. What pyramid city are you talking about, Aurora? Asked Monique. Below us is the beautiful city of pyramids. I saw it when I was wearing the helmet in the command center. We were floating over the sunken city when the storm began, and we are still over it now. So the ship could not have moved. Come, Aurora, show me the pyramid city you saw, said Monique as she led Aurora out of the captain's quarters. Raven, Jesus spoke of specific prophecies concerning the age we are now living in. What I need the research teams to do is validate my experience. If what I just witnessed is a more accurate account of events that transpired during the crucifixion, then humanity is in grave danger. I have a tremendous amount of information to disclose, and I will do so when the team is completely assembled. Walk with me to the forward command center. I'll explain on the way, suggested Cherrick. I want to see what Aurora was talking about. Raven turned and retrieved a thick towel coat from the bulkhead compartment. Handing it to Cherrick, she said, I'm not used to seeing you wander about the ship out of uniform, Commander. Cherrick nodded and continued with his conversation. To the ancients, there were originally two words that meant to know. One word meant you had an academic knowledge of things. The other, know, was spelled with a G instead of a K, as in the word Gnostic. To know was pronounced the same way. The word meant you understood with absolute certainty, even if you could not comprehend fully how you arrived at that awareness. It is this word I am now using when I tell you that I know we are in perilous times. Mon Capitan, Commandant, Monique called over the intercom. Please come down to the workstation's command center. You're not going to believe this. I've taken the liberty of launching an autonomous underwater probe to investigate the site. Tarrant gazed through a virtual reality helmet's display. The sunlight was fading, and the seas were growing dark. Far below him appeared pyramids and other structures illuminated by the blue-green laser from the AUP's optics array. The probe had not reached the site yet, and lights would be useless at this great a distance. He set the helmet down and instructed Raven to launch a second probe. They would have to return and make a full investigation later. He also gave orders for a squadron of AUPs to be launched at the coordinates the ship was believed to have started its mission from. If Aurora believes the ship remained over the sunken city the entire time, there should be pyramids at our previous location as well. Captain, said a voice on the intercom. This is the captain. Go ahead, replied Raven. Captain, Atlantic Fleet is unable to comply with your request to launch an AUP squadron over our last known location. It appears there is still a tremendous amount of U.S. naval activity in the area. This activity is what had caused their original concerns when Defiant first went missing. Also, we've just received an urgent dispatch for Tarek. It is classified, 7 seals. Understood. Have the dispatch sent to my quarters. He'll take it in there, ordered Raven. After reading the encrypted message, Tarek handed it to Raven and added, "Raven, I'll need a map of Colombia so I can douse the location. I doubt the small village mentioned in the communique by Father Artemis shows up on any of our maps. I'll need you to arrange transport as well." Raven nodded her understanding and asked, "Another helpless family the church has turned its back on?" As Tarek handed her the message. "Asmodeus. Where have I read that name before?" Asmodeus was one of the demons summoned before King Solomon. "The demon of secrets and buried treasure, if I'm not mistaken," said Tarek, recalling his reading of the Keys of Solomon. "Solomon requested information from it during the construction of the first temple, right?" asked Raven, not sure if she remembered correctly. "It would appear the demon has resurfaced, and now the cardinals on the committee overseeing the exorcism intend to transport its host to the Vatican, where they hope to extract information from it. The hiding place of the Ark of the Covenant and the Templar treasure would be my guess." "Do you think such a thing is possible?" asked Raven in disbelief. "Asmodeus is no ordinary demon." "Do you think you're up to it, Commander? After what you've just been through, I mean." "Another exorcism, monsieur?" asked the concerned Monique, entering the cabin. Her words, richly adorned by her French accent, never seemed to alarm anyone. "That ordeal is probably the only thing that's going to get me through it. You forget, I've just spent the last few years under Jesus' tutelage." "You can't stake your life and endanger Monique's on delusions of grandeur, Tarek," cautioned Raven. "I guess we're about to find out if I was hallucinating. The hard way," grinned Tarek. "How are we doing on that transport? Any of the sea wraiths nearby?" "A sea wraith transport will rendezvous with us within the hour, Commander," Monique informed him. "Weather conditions over northern Colombia are not favorable. There's a slow-moving hurricane skirting the northern shores of Venezuela and Colombia. As soon as headquarters receives your landing coordinates, they'll be able to calculate if it's possible to get you in as the hurricane's eye passes over the area. If that doesn't happen, I do not see how we will be able to get you to Colombia within the next few hours, sir." Turning towards Monique, Tarek ordered, "Prepare my exoskeleton, and make sure I'm equipped with tracer rounds. This will be a nighttime operation. As always, I'll need you to accompany me, number one," a term he'd taken to calling her. "I've set a course to intercept the sea wraith, mon capitaine," said Monique. "Sea conditions will be calm when we surface, due to our distance from the incoming hurricane. I'd requested a Battle Dragon cruiser, class Sea Wraith, for this mission," she added, in a whimsical tone, giving them a mischievous look as she exited the workstation.